Friday morning, 10:03 a.m. My job ended with a single email. The subject line was plain, no warning, no meeting request, just final words on a white screen. We no longer require your services. Your last day is today. I read it twice, then a third time, waiting for my chest to stop tightening. It didn't. Less than 24 hours earlier, I had stood in the conference room presenting a clean quarterly report. I had fixed errors that weren't mine. I had stayed late while others went home. People nodded. Someone even clapped. Now, I was finished. A second email came through almost immediately. It was from my boss. Good luck moving forward. No explanation, no thanks, no conversation, just a digital door slammed shut. I glanced around the office. Phones rang, keyboards clicked. Someone laughed near the printer. No one knew my world had just cracked open. Heat rushed to my face. Humiliation burned sharper than anger. They hadn't just fired me, they had erased me. But as my pulse slowed, something unexpected surfaced beneath the shock. Clarity. They believed I had nothing without them. They were very wrong. I stayed seated long after the email, my hands resting on the desk like they belonged to someone else. I watched my boss walk past without stopping. She didn't look at me once. That silence hurt more than the words on the screen. For years, I had filled gaps no one noticed. I had solved problems before they became disasters. When mistakes happened, I absorbed them quietly so the team could look strong. I told myself that loyalty mattered, that effort would be seen. That belief shattered in under a minute. I began packing my desk, slowly, carefully. A notebook filled with plans, a charger I bought with my own money, a small photo I never displayed. No one asked why, no one stopped me. As I stood up, I realized something chilling. They truly thought I was replaceable, that anyone could step in and do what I did. I walked toward the elevator with my head high, even though my stomach twisted. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me shrink. This wasn't just a firing. It was a mistake they hadn't measured yet, and I knew exactly how long it would take them to feel it. The elevator doors closed and the building hummed around me. Each floor passing felt like a reminder of time I could never get back. Nights spent fixing rushed decisions, weekends answering calls marked urgent. Outside, the sunlight felt strange, like it didn't belong in it yet. I sat in my car and finally let myself breathe. They had fired me on a Friday on purpose. They wanted fear to do their work for them. Instead, my mind sharpened. I thought about the systems I built from scratch, the processes no one else fully understood, the shortcuts I created to keep things running when leadership failed. I thought about the errors I had quietly corrected and documented. Power, I realized, wasn't tied to a title. It was tied to knowledge. By the time I drove home, anger had settled into focus. I wasn't going to send emotional emails or plead for clarity. I wasn't going to beg for a meeting. I was going to prepare. They believed I had walked out empty-handed. They forgot I carried their operations in my head. By Monday, they would remember. Saturday morning arrived with silence. No apology, no explanation. Just space. I made coffee and opened my laptop at the kitchen table. Not to search job boards. First, I needed perspective. I wrote everything down. Every skill, every project I rescued, every crisis I handled alone. Seeing it in black and white steadied me. I wasn't disposable. I was overlooked. Next, I reached out to my network. Calm messages, no drama. I'm available for consulting. I specialize in stabilizing broken systems. I didn't explain why I was free. Results didn't need excuses. Replies came faster than I expected. Questions, interest, respect. Then I reviewed my records. Timelines, reports, decisions that never should have passed review, patterns that showed how much risk I had absorbed for them. I wasn't plotting revenge. I was building protection. By the evening, one number stood alone at the top of my notes, $500 per hour. If my time was optional to them before, it wouldn't be again. They had taught me a lesson. I intended to return it with precision. Sunday felt calm, almost unreal. I went for a walk and let the anger drain away. Rage rushes decisions. Calm builds leverage. That afternoon, an email arrived from a former contact. Emergency consulting help. Short-term, high stakes. They asked my rate. I typed the number without blinking. They accepted immediately. My phone rang minutes later, a familiar number. I watched it buzz until it stopped. No voicemail. Then it rang again. I didn't answer. I already knew what had happened. Something had broken. A report missing, a process failing, a question no one else could answer. They had fired me thinking momentum would carry them forward. They forgot who built the tracks. That night, I set my alarm early. Monday was coming fast. When my phone rang again, I finally answered. Panic leaked through their words as they asked if I could return, even temporarily. I listened quietly. Then I spoke, slow and steady. I can come back, I said, but my rate is $500 an hour. The silence that followed told me everything had changed. Monday morning, 8:42 a.m., my phone rang again. This time I answered immediately. It was them, my old boss. The panic in her voice was unmistakable. "We need you back. Please, we made a mistake. Can you come in?" I let a small, quiet laugh escape. Not mocking, not cruel, just a sound that carried control. "My rate is $500 per hour," I said calmly. A pause, long enough that I pictured her grip tightening around the phone. Then a soft, desperate, "Yes, that's fine, whatever you want." I smiled, not because of the money, though it was nice, not because of the sudden power, though that thrilled me. I smiled because I had been underestimated. I had been dismissed, and now I was in command. I packed a small bag, grabbed my laptop, and left the house with my calm armor firmly in place. Every step I took toward that office was a reminder. They had tossed me aside. They had assumed weakness, and I was about to rewrite every assumption they held. The streets were empty early on a Monday, but in my mind, the office was silent, tense, waiting for me to remind them who had been keeping it all together. I drove past familiar landmarks, but nothing looked familiar. My world had changed, and so had I. I arrived at the office at 9:15 a.m. The receptionist barely looked up as I walked past. Good, I didn't need fanfare. My old office was quiet, too quiet. The hum of computers that used to feel comforting now seemed fragile, like a house built on sand. They met me in the conference room. Her face, my former boss, was pale. Her usual confidence was gone. "We're glad you're here," she stammered. I nodded. "I assume you understand why my rate has changed." "Yes," she whispered, almost apologetic. I opened my laptop and began reviewing ongoing projects. Every number, every file, every deadline was in my mind. Small mistakes jumped out immediately. I didn't have to search. I remembered everything. By the time she realized it, I was already halfway through correcting reports she thought were fine. Every adjustment I made carried weight. Every action reminded her, without me, nothing functioned properly. She looked at me, wide-eyed, and I knew. The power had shifted. They hadn't just begged, they had pleaded, and now they would pay the price for assuming I was replaceable. By mid-morning, the first crisis arrived. A client was furious because a report had been delayed. Before she could explain, I had the issue resolved. A simple tweak, a call to the right person, a few precise adjustments. The client's anger dissipated almost instantly. My former colleagues watched, silently, eyes wide. No one said a word. It felt strange. For years, I had been the silent engine powering everything. Now, every glance and every whispered apology reinforced a single truth. They had underestimated me. They assumed desperation. They assumed compliance. They assumed weakness. None of it was true. I sipped my coffee calmly and made a mental note of every email that had gone unanswered, every decision delayed by their incompetence, every dollar lost due to their negligence. By the time the clock hit noon, they weren't just relieved to have me back. They were dependent. And they hadn't even realized yet that the leverage I now held extended far beyond the office walls. At 12:47 p.m., the first formal request came in. "Can you train the new hires?" I smiled. They hadn't asked for permission, had they? Just assumed I would comply. I stood in front of the small group, most of whom barely knew me, and began. Not a lecture, not a dry tutorial. I shared strategy, workflow, and insight. Every tip and trick I had used quietly for months. By the time lunch rolled around, the room buzzed with energy. Questions came, I answered calmly. Each question I addressed reminded them this was knowledge they hadn't earned on their own. They had been relying on me all along. After lunch, my old boss approached. We can't thank you enough." I nodded. Polite, Distant, not smug, not yet. I was still observing, calculating. Every word, every glance, every hesitation mattered. By the end of the day, it was clear. My return wasn't just accepted, it was essential. And the best part? They hadn't bargained yet for the true price of my time. At 4:29 p.m., I received a message from an old client I had helped discreetly during the weeks prior to my firing. They were ready to formalize a short-term consulting agreement. The rate I had decided on Saturday flashed on the screen, $500 per hour. I replied without hesitation. They agreed immediately. The double effect hit me. 1. I was making more in a day than I had in weeks at the company. 2. My former employer was now acutely aware that I had options. Power had a new rhythm, and it beat in my chest steadily. Later, as I left the office, my former boss lingered near the elevator. Her expression was a mixture of awe and fear. "I hope we can keep you longer than today," she murmured. I smiled softly, carefully, calmly. Of course, for the right price. And just like that, the balance of power was redefined. Friday, they fired me. Monday, they would pay me more than they had ever imagined.
Tuesday, 9:08 a.m. I arrived at the office with a quiet confidence. The corridors felt smaller somehow, like the building itself was bending to my return. I carried my laptop like a weapon, sharp and ready. The team looked different, not in appearance but in posture. Nervous, hesitant, eyes flicking toward me as if I were a storm about to hit. Funny thing, I wasn't storming. I was simply present. By mid-morning, I had reviewed all active projects. Errors were glaring. Misfiled reports, miscalculated budgets, mismanaged deadlines. Every issue had been created by overconfidence and neglect. I drafted a concise report with clear corrections. My former boss watched over my shoulder, biting her lip. She couldn't speak. The damage was visible. By lunchtime, I called an impromptu team meeting, not to scold, but to guide. Every instruction I gave, every clarification I made reinforced a truth. The office had functioned because of me, not despite them. The realization settled like a cold shadow across the room. No one dared challenge me because every small decision now depended on my knowledge and skill. By the end of the day, I felt a subtle thrill. The leverage I had built quietly over months had matured into full control. And the price for that power? They hadn't even begun to comprehend it. Wednesday, 10:11 a.m. I received an urgent call from a client who had suffered repeated delays due to internal mismanagement. I smiled to myself. Perfect timing. They had no idea the solution was already in my hands. I requested their latest reports, quickly analyzed the data, and proposed a clear, actionable plan. By 11:30 a.m., the client was praising me, not the office. Every word they spoke reinforced the same truth I was living. They needed me more than ever. Back at the office, my former boss looked nervous. She tried small talk, but I could see the tension beneath her polite tone. She was calculating, wondering how much damage had been done and how quickly I could repair it. I didn't respond. I let her imagine, let her feel it. By late afternoon, I drafted a new workflow to prevent future mistakes. Each step meticulously documented, leaving no room for guesswork. Every person in the room was forced to follow my lead, silently acknowledging my authority. For the first time in months, I felt the full weight of empowerment. The humiliation of Friday had transformed into a weapon, precise, clean, and inescapable. They had fired me thinking they were free of me. Now they were bound. Thursday, 8:57 a.m. I walked past cubicles filled with hushed whispers and sideways glances. People knew change was in the air, but they didn't understand its scope. I sat at my desk and opened my email. Piles of requests, complaints, and unresolved problems awaited me. Perfect. A chance to demonstrate competence and control simultaneously. By 10 a.m., I had resolved 3 client escalations, coordinated 2 project deadlines, and preemptively identified errors that would have caused delays next week. Every action demonstrated what they had ignored for months. My former boss hovered near the doorway, nervously asking questions, offering suggestions. I politely nodded, then implemented my plan instead. The subtle tension was delicious. By late afternoon, whispers of admiration and relief were circulating among the team. They had been functioning, yes, but now every eye turned to me. Late afternoon, the first formal proposal arrived from a potential new client. My consulting offer, $500 an hour, minimum 3 days. I hit send. By the time the office emptied, I realized something crucial. My value wasn't just in fixing mistakes, it was in showing them how irreplaceable I had always been. Friday, they discarded me. Thursday, they acknowledged the cost of their arrogance. Friday, 9:03 a.m. The office was tense. Everyone knew the week had transformed. My presence had redefined expectations, and even my old allies treated me with newfound respect. I checked the financial reports. Mistakes my former boss had ignored were now clearly visible. I marked them for correction, ensuring the lessons would stick. At 11:12 a.m., my phone rang. Another consulting client confirming the $500 per hour engagement. My bank account would reflect the true value of my expertise soon enough. By 2:30 p.m., I called a short meeting. I didn't shout, I didn't lecture, I outlined new protocols, clarified responsibilities, and set expectations for accountability. Every word mattered. When the meeting ended, my former boss approached. She tried small talk, but I could see the fear in her eyes. The power dynamic had shifted. I was no longer a cog. I was a force, a calculated storm they had invited in. By 4:55 p.m., I packed my things, leaving the office knowing two things. One, I was more valuable than they would ever admit. And two, my rate had become a symbol of respect and control. They had begged me back Monday. Now, I dictated the terms. Saturday, 10:21 a.m. I sat at a coffee shop reviewing the week. Emails, calls, contracts, all flowing in. My consulting rate had become the new standard, a reflection of my worth. I reflected on Friday. The humiliation, the anger, the shock. It had been necessary. It had sparked a clarity I didn't realize I needed. By noon, I had lined up 3 more high-paying clients, my calendar filled with opportunities while my former employer scrambled to retain my presence. It was not just revenge. It was proof that competence, consistency, and confidence could never be ignored forever. I smiled, sipping my coffee. The storm of Friday had passed, leaving behind a calm, controlled power. By Sunday evening, I drafted a new plan, one that ensured I would never be underestimated again. My rate, my schedule, my expertise, no longer negotiable. And as the sun set over the city skyline, I realized the most important lesson. True power isn't in reacting, it's in shaping the future while everyone else scrambles to catch up. Monday, 8:45 a.m. My phone buzzed relentlessly. I ignored it at first, letting them sweat. By 9:03 a.m., I finally glanced at the screen. Multiple emails from my old office. Subject lines like, "Urgent, need your guidance," and "Please call immediately." I smiled. The power dynamic had reversed. They had begged me back, and now every request carried desperation. By 10 a.m., I responded with one clear line. My rate, $500 an hour. Minimum 3 days per engagement. No negotiation. No pleading. By 11:15 a.m., I received a reply. Agreed. Please advise immediately. I opened my laptop and dove into their mess of mismanaged projects, misfiled reports, delayed client feedback, and inaccurate spreadsheets. Every problem I solved reinforced a simple truth. They couldn't function without me. At 2:30 p.m., my former boss appeared, hesitating at the door. She tried small talk, asked about my plans. I answered succinctly, reminding her politely that control now rested in my hands. By 4 p.m., I finished all urgent corrections. The office hummed quietly, everyone now acutely aware that my absence had been catastrophic. By the evening, my consulting contracts for the day alone would pay more than my previous monthly salary. Revenge had become profit, and clarity had turned into freedom. Tuesday, 9:12 a.m. I arrived early to the office to find my calendar filled with internal calls. Every team member awaited instructions. The atmosphere was tense, aware that mistakes would no longer be tolerated. By mid-morning, I'd implemented a new verification process. Each step documented, responsibilities clarified. The errors that had plagued projects vanished as if someone had switched a light on. During lunch, my former boss approached. She tried casual conversation, but faltered when she realized I was unshaken. I wasn't here to argue, I was here to guide, and every instruction reinforced my authority. By 3 p.m., emails from clients poured in. Gratitude, praise, and acknowledgement of swift resolutions. Every message reinforced my leverage and reminded me that they had underestimated me for too long. By 5:15 p.m., I paused to review the week. Each day had strengthened my position, and $500 an hour was no longer a price. It was a reflection of respect earned. I left the office feeling a deep satisfaction. Their arrogance had underestimated my capability, and now they were learning that competence could never be ignored. Wednesday, 8:50 a.m. I walked past cubicles buzzing with whispered conversations. Eyes followed me, curious, cautious. Respect was being rebuilt, slowly, deliberately. By 10:30 a.m., I reviewed the latest reports. Multiple errors caused by negligence. I corrected each one, documenting lessons learned and forwarding notes to the team. My approach was calm, methodical, and impossible to ignore. By 1:35 p.m., I called a brief team meeting. No finger-pointing, no anger, just instructions, insight, and expectations. Everyone felt the weight of my authority without a word of confrontation. By 3:45 p.m., I began drafting a plan to automate certain processes, reducing dependency on manual oversight while emphasizing my unique expertise. My presence wasn't just required, it was irreplaceable. At 5 p.m., the office was quiet. Everyone had learned. Mistakes without me were costly. My rate, my terms, my guidance. No one would question again. I left feeling the thrill of mastery. Friday's humiliation had become a launchpad for control, respect, and financial independence. Thursday, 9:02 a.m. A client called with urgent concerns about delayed project approvals. I smiled quietly. The solution was already drafted in my notes. By 10:20 a.m., I'd corrected their errors, reassured them, and proposed improvements. They praised my foresight, unaware that the same office had fired me just days ago. By noon, I sat down with my team reviewing ongoing projects. Every correction, every adjustment reinforced my authority. Mistakes were no longer tolerated, and the office had transformed under my guidance. At 3 p.m., my former boss attempted a discussion about timelines. I calmly explained priorities, demonstrating control without confrontation. The shift was clear. I wasn't just back, I was indispensable. By 4:45 p.m., my phone buzzed with a new client request, another $500 an hour consulting engagement. Profit and power had become intertwined, and the lesson was clear. My expertise now commanded respect. By the end of the day, the office had a new rhythm. Errors diminished, morale steadily improved, and every action reflected my influence. Friday's firing had been an awakening. Now, I was unstoppable. Friday, 8:57 a.m. I arrived knowing the week had shifted the office dynamic completely. Eyes followed me, murmurs passed, and every email bore my attention. By 10:25 a.m., I had completed 2 major project revisions, corrected scheduling conflicts, and implemented accountability measures. My team functioned efficiently, but always under my guidance. By 1:30 p.m., I called a meeting with the leadership team. I outlined future protocols, emphasizing clarity, efficiency, and responsibility. Everyone listened. No one interrupted. Respect was earned, tangible and silent. By 3:45 p.m., I finalized my consulting engagements for the day. $500 an hour had become standard, but more importantly, I had secured my position as someone whose absence was unfathomable. As I packed my bag, my former boss approached, offering gratitude and apologies. I nodded politely, acknowledging the acknowledgement without needing further explanation. The lesson had been learned, and my power solidified. By 5:30 p.m., I walked out of the office for the weekend, head held high. From the humiliation of Friday to the triumph of control, the week had transformed everything. I wasn't just back, I had risen. Monday morning, 8:57 a.m., I reviewed the week ahead. New clients, ongoing projects, and internal improvements filled my calendar. My phone buzzed, a notification from my old office. Urgent meeting requested. Need your input immediately. I paused, savoring the reversal. The office that had discarded me without thought now scrambled to secure my guidance. I replied calmly, I will attend. Rate $500 an hour, minimum 2 hours. By 10 a.m., I walked into the conference room. Every manager present looked tense, aware that my presence now dictated the pace and direction. I outlined strategies, flagged potential risks, and proposed solutions. Each suggestion was precise, backed by evidence, and impossible to ignore. By noon, projects that had been stuck for weeks began to move again. Miscommunications vanished, approvals were streamlined, and client satisfaction soared. The transformation was clear. My expertise was no longer optional, it was essential. By 3:30 p.m., my former boss tried to negotiate timelines, but I reminded them politely yet firmly that every adjustment required my approval. The shift in control was complete. By the end of the day, my phone reflected the reality. Every email, every call, every project relied on me. Friday's firing had been the catalyst, but now I held the reins. Tuesday, 9:05 a.m., I arrived early and began auditing current projects. Mistakes from the previous management team were abundant, each one a testament to their overconfidence. By 11:15 a.m., I had corrected errors, implemented checks, and drafted detailed reports for each team. I distributed them with clear instructions and deadlines, ensuring accountability. By 1 p.m., I met with the leadership team. My former boss watched silently as I presented solutions and schedules. Her earlier confidence had vanished, replaced
replaced with respect. By 3:45 p.m., client calls poured in, praising the rapid progress. I realized that my professional reputation, which they had tried to discard, now carried undeniable weight. By 5:30 p.m., I left the office with satisfaction. They had fired me without understanding my value, but I had returned stronger than ever, setting a new standard. Wednesday, 8:50 a.m., I reviewed reports and prepared for a critical project review. The room buzzed with nervous energy. The team knew the stakes had shifted. By 10 a.m., I began presenting findings, highlighting errors and proposing solutions. Each recommendation was precise, actionable, and backed by evidence. By noon, the team began executing my plan. Delays were corrected, communication streamlined, and accountability reinforced. My authority was unquestioned. By 3:15 p.m., my phone buzzed. A new consulting inquiry. $500 an hour for another project. Profit and leverage continued to grow. By 5 p.m., the office atmosphere had transformed. Respect replaced arrogance, efficiency replaced chaos, and my power had solidified. Friday's humiliation had been the spark for a career renaissance. Thursday, 9:10 a.m., I received another frantic call from my former boss. Another project had gone off track without me. I smiled, calmly noting my rate before agreeing to assist. By 11 a.m., I had analyzed the situation, corrected the errors, and implemented safeguards to prevent recurrence. My presence was a guarantee of efficiency. By 2:30 p.m., I met with senior leadership. I outlined long-term protocols that would maintain order, minimize mistakes, and enhance client satisfaction. My influence was now embedded in the company structure. By 4:45 p.m., my consulting calendar was full, my rates secure, and my leverage absolute. Friday's firing felt like a distant memory, replaced by the control, respect, and independence I had carved for myself. Friday, 9 a.m., 1 week after my dismissal, I sat in my office reviewing projects. My phone buzzed repeatedly with calls and emails from clients, colleagues, and former bosses. By 10:30 a.m., I realized the full transformation. The office that discarded me now depended on me. My $500 an hour weight was no longer a number. It was proof of earned respect and authority. By noon, all projects were on track, teams motivated, and clients satisfied. The humiliation of Friday had given way to empowerment, control, and opportunity. By 3:35 p.m., I paused, reflecting on the week. I had turned betrayal into profit, chaos into order, and disrespect into reverence. By 5:30 p.m., I left for the weekend, head held high. I had proven one simple truth: know your worth, protect it fiercely, and never allow anyone to make you feel replaceable. Friday's firing was the beginning of my rise, and now I controlled the story, the projects, and my destiny. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or thrown aside, remember this: the best revenge isn't chaos or anger, it's mastery, strategy, and showing them exactly what they lost. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the next story will teach you how to rise above betrayal, claim your power, and make sure no one ever underestimates you again.